Every novelist has the same aim, to create an imaginary world and then draw the reader into that world. And if we do it well, then the reader prefers the imaginary world to the real world, and he or she feels disappointed when the time comes to put the book down and turn out the light and go to sleep.
Ken Follett is one of the world's most successful novelists. He sells more books year on year than John Grisham and J.K. Rowling. He is also that rare thing, a celebrity novelist who enjoys his high public profile.
I always wanted to be a star. I might as well put my hand up and confess to this because it's part of my personality, always has been, and there's no point in me trying to kid anybody.
His success has always gone comfortably hand in hand with a social conscience. He is married to former Labour Cabinet Minister Barbara Follett and was a high-profile supporter of the Labour parties of Neil Kinnock and Tony Blair.
What do you think of the media coverage as far as Mrs Follett goes? Many references to her being a champagne socialist.
Look, the fact that Barbara is a successful person and her husband is successful is great. You know, we shouldn't hold that against people.
Ken's worldview and his voice as an author were shaped by his early upbringing in Wales.
My books have an international appeal that's quite unusual, and I've thought about this, and I've thought, why is that? And I think being Welsh has something to do with it, or rather, what I really mean is that not being English, and being Welsh, and being, in some way, an outsider, has given me a perspective on things that is not parochial. And I think that's part of the reason why I have a very big international audience.
The figures are quite astonishing. His novels have sold over 140 million copies worldwide.
In 1978, he became Britain's youngest millionaire, and last year he broke publishing records by asking for and getting $10 million for his next 2 novels. It's funny money, isn't it? I mean, all those novels.
It is, I suppose, yes. It was $12 million, actually.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
His story starts here, in a mid-terraced house in Cardiff.
This is 46 Leckwith Avenue, and I lived here for the first 10 years of my life. We played in this street. There were no cars parked, of course. If a car came down the street, all the boys would go and look at it. We played on the railway line, which we thought was perfectly normal. But I haven't been back inside this house since I was 10 years old. We had no TV, no radio, no recorded music. My parents belonged to a religious sect called the Plymouth Brethren, and they felt that such things as TV and radio and movies were wicked and would be an evil influence on us, and who knows, perhaps they were right.
Ken's come back to meet the present owner of the house, Den Robertson. But what he doesn't know is that he and Den have met before. It was a red letter day, as Den's late wife Sylvia noted in her diary.
Den and I moved in our house, 46 Leckwith Avenue, 12th of September, 59. Oh, so you bought it from my dad. Well, well.
We walked down the avenue, me and Sylvia, and we said to each other, oh, this is nice. And we got to the door. Your dad let us in. It was lovely. We went upstairs into the back bedroom, and there was 2 little kids laying in the bed. One was you.
Yeah.
And the other one was Hannah, is it?
My sister Hannah.
And we were only in here a matter of minutes, and when we came down and spoke to your dad, and we said, yes, we'll buy it, please.
Well, that's fantastic. That's amazing.
With no TV or radio, Ken's only form of entertainment was reading. His parents thought this would broaden his mind, and it did, but not in the way they were thinking. It was thrillers he loved, and the powerful impression they made on his young mind came out many years later in his own writing.
Faber stepped outside. Walking quickly, he came within sight of the agent
going in the direction of Piccadilly. There was no sign of the tail. Faber followed him. The agent went into a cafe. He came out after half an hour. Faber tailed him through a succession of residential streets. He knew where he was going, but was in no hurry. He did not look back, and Faber thought, another amateur.
Canton Library gave Ken his first window on the world. He devoured books at a rate of 3 a week. His favourite writer was Ian Fleming, and he read the Bond books over and over again.
I was 12 when I read Casino Royale. It absolutely blew me away. Of course, it described a world I knew nothing of. I had never met anybody who'd ever drunk a martini. I thought, I'm going to be a secret agent, and I'm going to drive that car, and I'm going to have that gun, and I'm going to dress just like that. The blue suit, Sea Island cotton shirt. I had no idea what Sea Island cotton was. It was another 20 years before I would discover what Sea Island cotton was.
In 1968, Ken was a student at University College London when a bombshell awakened his political consciousness.
I belong to a generation of boys brought up on the story that we beat the Nazis. We were the good guys. Then it came as a terrible shock to us to discover that in the Vietnam War, we were the bad guys. And like almost all politically aware people of my generation, I went on the marches and demonstrated. Then as it went on, of course, it got worse because the lies were exposed. And this was even more shocking to my generation as teenagers. What, the government's lying? The American president's lying to people about this? How could that be possible? So it was very shocking.
No one who went on those anti-Vietnam marches has ever forgotten them. And that includes one of Ken's closest university friends, who is now himself a professor of cultural history.
I think if one is going to be fair, one must realize that those of us who were inspired by Vietnam, who took a stand against the war in Vietnam, who went to demonstrations, and all that, we were a minority. But certainly there was a sort of populist element of this huge, enormous machine which is waging war, not against the Soviet Union, but a very small country with a third world country. And we idealize the Vietnamese as, in a sense, representative of those of the powerless. And so you have a top technologically superior country in the world fighting against one of the bottom one and not winning.
The Vietnam War and the political cover-up which followed have continued to reverberate throughout Ken's work.
You can't use a popular novel to get a political message across, I don't think. And certainly, I've always felt that although my values are clearly present in my novels, that if I tried to use my work to persuade people of a political point of view, A, they'd know what I was up to and they'd suss me immediately, and B, they wouldn't buy the book anyway. On the other hand, one reviewer said, you can tell Follett's a socialist because he takes half a page to describe the gown that the Duchess is wearing to the ball, but he also tells you that it took the maid all afternoon to iron it.
Baked beans. Bread for toast. And brown sauce.
Move that across, it's almost out.
In the 1990s, Ken played an active role on the campaign trail, supporting his wife Barbara, who was running for Parliament.
Barbara Follett, how's it looking? It's terrific.
It's no fun being rich and famous if you're surrounded by people who are sleeping in shop doorways and who can't get enough to eat and can't buy shoes for their children. And if you live in a country where School children haven't got textbooks. The young friend of my family said to me the other day that she, in her biology A-level, she shared a textbook with 6 people, 6 other students. She only had it for a fortnight in 2 years of A-level. That's crazy. I don't want to live in a country like that, and that's why I'm a socialist.
Straight out of university and with a head full of ideas about how to change the world, Ken got his first job back in Cardiff as a junior reporter on the South Wales Echo. It was here that he first learned how to write crisp, direct prose that would hook the reader and tell a good story.
Hi, Ken.
Hello, Ken.
Lovely to meet you.
My pleasure. How are you?
I'm all right. How are you?
Pretty good. Pretty good.
I've got some cuttings here from our cuttings library.
I hope you haven't got any photographs of me.
Oh, I might have a few photographs as well. Got some stories here about your career taking off after you left the Echo, and we've got some wonderful photographs as well.
Black hair. Isn't that great?
Does that take you back?
My goodness me. And, of course, a typewriter.
I know.
And there aren't any typewriters in this room now.
It must be very different then to when you worked at the Echo.
Oh, completely. Yeah, completely. I mean, we had carbon paper, which we used to put into the typewriter, and we used to go clack, clack, clackety, clack.
So a noisy newsroom.
It was much noisier. And, of course, in the old South Wales Echo building, the printing press was on the ground floor. And so when it rolled, everybody could feel it.
Yeah,
That was quite a thrill, really, because the story that you had written in this morning, you could feel it being printed underneath.
It's amazing. Amazing.
But this is better.
One of Ken's fellow journalists was future Labour MP Alan Michael.
Ken was a very serious journalist. He was interested in reporting accurately, but he also had a very good social sense. I think he was the person who got angry about things that happened. And you couldn't avoid, in the South Wales of the 60s, being quite annoyed about a lot of things. You saw social conditions that really cried out for to be addressed. And Cardiff itself was a wreck. It was a depressed town, there's no two ways about it, and a lot that you were reporting on was pretty depressing.
In preparing his first speech as a new Member of Parliament, Lloyd Williams had his grandfather in mind. Di Williams used the language and rhythms of the Bible, not just in chapel, but also when speaking of the hardship and injustice of the life of a coal miner. He relished short words rich in meaning. Toil, sin, greed. He spoke of the hearth and the pit and the grave. Lloyd Williams stood up to speak. But after a minute, he abandoned his script. He recalled instead the misery of working-class families made penniless by unemployment or disability, scenes he had witnessed firsthand in the East End of London and the South Wales coalfield. His voice betrayed the emotion he felt, somewhat to his embarrassment, but he ploughed on. He sensed his audience beginning to pay attention. He spoke of his grandfather and others who had started the labour movement with a dream of banishing forever the fear of destitution. When he sat down, there was a roar of approval.
Ken was still a struggling junior reporter when he started dabbling with fiction. Initially, there were several unpublished short stories. The inspiration for his first novel came out of necessity.
My car broke down, and it was going to cost £200 to repair it. And I just didn't have the money. Couldn't borrow it from anybody. Went to the bank, asked them if they would lend me £200 to get my car fixed. They said no. There was another reporter on the newspaper I was working for, and he had just written a thriller. And he got it published, and the advance he got from the publisher was £200. Light bulb going off, you know. And so I said to my wife, I know how we're going to get the car back. I'm going to write a thriller. I wrote it very fast, wasn't very good, but it was good enough to be published. And I got £200 and I got my car fixed. And then I thought, maybe if I take a little bit more time with the next one, it might be a bit better.
Over the next 5 years, Ken wrote 9 more novels. His agent advised him to publish them under an assumed name, just in case one day he wrote something good. All were unsuccessful.
In those days, of course, I would read bestsellers and I would think, now why is this book at the front of the shop in a stack of 50? And my latest book, because I wrote 10 unsuccessful books, my latest book, there would be, if I was lucky, 2 copies at the back of the store. Okay, what is Sidney Sheldon doing to get at the front of the store and 50 hardback copies? And what am I doing wrong that I'm at the back of the store? So I did think about that a lot, and I would read, and every time a book cast a spell over me, I would say, how did he do that, or she? How did she do that? How did that author cast a spell on me?
Eventually, he found the formula, and his 11th novel, Eye of the Needle, published in 1978, became an international bestseller.
When I knew him, he was completely unknown, and I remember once he said something like his ambition was to write books, novels, and we sort of said, yes, Ken, of course, I'm sure you'll do well, or something like that. And we thought, this is little fantasies of a young man. So I'm going to a bookshop and seeing the pile of his books. Wow, is this our Ken?
Eye of the Needle is a wartime thriller in which a fictional drama is set against a backdrop of actual historical events. It made perfect feature film material, but despite its impressive set pieces and starry cast led by Donald Sutherland, the film could not match the book for emotional intensity and has now been largely forgotten, whereas Ken's original novel is still selling.
To a large extent, you've got to blame Frederick Forsyth, because The Day of the Jackal changed the way everybody wrote thrillers. Before then, you could just have somebody pull a gun. You can't do that now. If somebody draws a gun in one of my stories, I've got to tell you the make of the gun and the caliber of the ammunition and where the safety catch is. Is it on the left or the right? And do you push it up or do you push it down? And that's great. I mean, that gives you immediacy. Then you feel as if the character has got a gun in his or her hand, if you have all that information. But nobody did it until Fred wrote that book.
Like Ken, Frederick Forsyth started out in journalism, working for the Reuters news agency in Paris in the early 1960s. He reported on terrorist plots to assassinate French President Charles de Gaulle.
The overriding discipline was really just logic, and it seemed to me that if you called the President of France in 1962-3 Monsieur Dupont, people would say, "It's ridiculous, he was Charles de Gaulle, there was no question about it."
The Day of the Jackal was made into an iconic feature film, memorable for James Fox's chilling portrayal of a hired assassin. Frederick Forsyth's stylistic devices upped the tension on screen, but with such well-known characters and events involved, the film could not match the immediacy and authenticity of the original novel.
I named really figures who were checkable, and then blended the fictional characters in with the real ones, which I was told later, after being published, was weird, odd. Nobody had done it before. Ken and I were both provincial reporters. He in Wales, I in Norfolk. We both went to London, to what was then Fleet Street, now isn't anymore. I wanted only to leave the country. Ken stayed in it. But then when he began doing his first, or the first of his most famous, like Eye of the Needle and Key to Rebecca, he again took real events, albeit Second World War events, further back than I've ever gone, but nevertheless, real events people can recall or having read about, and then he extrapolated into a story that could well have happened. He probably didn't, but then the same with my stuff.
Over the next decade, Ken carved a reputation as one of the world's leading thriller writers. Then, at the height of his success, he announced that his next novel would be a complete departure, an epic historical saga set in the Middle Ages.
As a boy, I never came into churches like this. For us, in the Plymouth Brethren, a church was a plain room with white walls, no pictures, no statues. And there was a moment then when, as a young man, I discovered cathedrals. The question that strikes you is, why did they want one of these? These fabulous European cathedrals were built by medieval people who lived in wooden huts. and slept on the floor. They had no power tools. They didn't have the mathematics to figure out whether it would stand up or fall down. And that was the fascination for me, that something this wonderful was built by primitive people. I began to see the possibility of a novel, a big, long novel, but a popular novel, that would have as its core the building of a great church like this one.
It took 3 years to research. Ken hired a team of history professors to make sure every last period detail was correct. It was a more ambitious project than anything he had ever attempted. But not everyone was excited about his new direction.
A lot of people were very skeptical of the idea. Their attitude was, look, Ken, you've had great success with Nazis and spies and CIA agents. Now you want to write a book about building a church in the Middle Ages? Are you sure?
His publishers did not like it, and they approached me and said, could I stop him? And I said I wouldn't dream of stopping him. They said, you know, he's so good at writing these books. And I said, yes, and you're worried that this will not make you money, and I understand that. But, you know, have confidence in him. Some of them were quite angry with him about it, because when you've got somebody laying nice little golden eggs every so often, you don't want them to say, well, I'm just going to try a platinum one now.
Tom was offered the post of builder, repairing and improving the city's fortifications. It would have been a lifetime job barring accidents, but he turned it down, for he wanted to build another cathedral. His wife Agnes couldn't understand the decision. She couldn't comprehend the irresistible attraction of building a cathedral, the absorbing complexity of organisation, the intellectual challenge of calculations, the sheer size of the walls, and the breathtaking beauty and grandeur of the finished building. Once he tasted that wine, Tom was never satisfied with anything less.
That book worked my imagination harder than anything I had ever done. At the end of it, I felt exhausted. It's the only time in my career that I felt imagination fatigue. I really felt I'd given it everything I had.
The Pillars of the Earth is one of the most popular novels ever written. Readers of the Times voted it the second greatest novel of the last 60 years. In Germany, 250,000 viewers of the television channel ZDF voted it the third greatest book of all time, just behind the Bible and The Lord of the Rings. Its commercial and critical success took Ken's career to another level and introduced his work to a whole new readership.
Because I'm a historian, so many of his books are historically based, I did what people like me do. How many mistakes can we find? And it's extremely annoying not to find them. You know, he did his research extremely well. There are things which are not plausible in the sense that, you know, a woman in the Middle Ages is very unlikely to behave the way some of his women would behave in the Middle Ages. But frankly, one can say this about virtually any writer, about Victor Hugo or Balzac or Dickens and so on. There is, you know, one needs to tell a story. But when it comes to the detail, to the accuracy of the historical detail, it's quite remarkable.
It's quite clear reading Ken's novels that having decided what his theme is, he then goes to meticulous detail to understand both the context and the technology and to make that a significant part of the story. And that helps to give credibility then to both the society that's built up in his novels and also the interaction between individuals and personalities. It all becomes more credible. So I think there's actually a trail back to the South Wales Echo and the discipline of being a reporter, both in terms of accuracy and in terms of use of language.
Ken's latest novel, Winter of the World, was published in September 2012. It's the second part of the epic trilogy which tells the story of the 20th century through the lives of 5 interrelated families. Like all of his novels, it features compelling female characters. His books and his life are full of strong women.
at the end of the 60s, I remember specifically a meeting, a political meeting, where somebody said, we all believe in democracy, and we all believe that we're all equal. How come it's always the girls who do the typing and make the tea? And I remember thinking, Jesus, that's true. How did I never notice that?
He's always been fascinated by stronger women. I mean, in real life as well. Women who have opinions, women who won't put up with him or will challenge him. And I think that translates into his books. It can be terribly irritating when you've had a really bad day and you come in and you want to have a thorough moan. He'll say, deal with it. And you think, I have been dealing with it. Now I want to moan about it. But he prefers the dealing with it.
With more than 20 best-selling novels to his name, Ken could be forgiven for slowing down. But he works as hard as ever. He takes his readers very seriously.
Once you've got a crowd of people who love your work and are looking forward to the next one, it does become slightly worrying because you don't want to disappoint them. It is a worry and it is a burden, but it's not really bad because after all, it's keeping me on my toes, isn't it?
I am an arty-farty intellectual, and so my normal reading are novels which would be regarded as literary novels rather than popular novels. And so in a way, I read Ken's books because I had known him and I knew him. And so I started reading them with a sort of snobbish air of superiority because it was obviously not Proust. He'd be the first to agree. At the same time, I was completely captivated. I find it slightly annoying that I couldn't put the book down. I could say, but actually, this is not high art. It's, all the scenes last, 4 or 5 pages. And yet, after 50 pages, I absolutely needed to know what was going to happen next.
Ken's mind is very inventive, and he's always moving on to new things. Sometimes at a speed which leaves the rest of us breathless. But I'm always waiting to see what will come next, and that's what makes him so fascinating to be with.
We're both, in essence, storytellers. And it's a good profession, storytellers. Nothing dishonourable about telling a good story. Shakespeare did it.
Ken's storytelling power and his popularity show no signs of diminishing. His books get bigger in every way, and many of his readers would say they also get better. He's a writer who found the Midas touch and never lost it.
People often say that success is disappointing and wealth is disappointing and all that. I can't say that. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I always had a taste for the good life. I must be in rebellion against the Puritanism of my parents in some way because all my adult life I've loved good food and wine and cashmere sweaters and great hotels and flying first class. All that I've always loved, and it was nothing about it was a disappointment. That was what I wanted, and I got it, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it.